and welcome to Coffee Break. It's Steve Barrett here, the editorial director of PR Week, here with another edition. I'm delighted to be joined by Kylie Wright Ford, who's the CEO of the RepTrak company. And Kylie's joining us from Australia at the moment, paying a trip back home to see family, but she's usually based in Boston. So Kylie, welcome to Coffee Break, all the way from Australia.
Thanks, Steve. I'm delighted to be here. It's a beautiful morning in Australia. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, oh, you're painting a picture there. It's just coming into summer, isn't it now? So
lovely.
A bit of cricket coming with the England team coming over. Please treat us kindly.
Never.
But yeah, tell us about the RepTrak company. You track corporate reputation, and formerly known as the Reputation Institute, I think. And you've been doing that for 15 years, and you'll have seen lots of trends and things. But over the last 18 months, corporate reputation has become even more important, and the awareness of its importance has increased as well. So tell us about that and tell us some of the trends you've been seeing.
Thanks, Steve. It has never been more important, although I have to say I've been saying that for the 3 years that I've been at the RepTrak company. As you mentioned, we were Reputation Institute, so many folks will know us as that. We rebranded right in the thick of COVID-19 just kicking off in 2020. And we did that for a few reasons. First is the RepTrak company was born on the idea that if you understood what your non-financial assets were on the balance sheet, and so if you could quantify them and roll them up as a concept of reputation, which is largely what they are, then you could actually target the priorities more accurately. You could do something about your reputation, and we knew that reputation was the leading indicator to good outcomes, so good business outcomes. And so we founded on that principle that we needed to quantify it, then we could measure it, then we could set KPIs, and we could say and do the right things around our reputation. So fast forward 15 years and we still hold true to that. And our mission is actually to prove statistically that doing and saying the right thing is good for business. So for 15 years, it's been our life's work to work with companies and help them understand what people are saying about them. We hold up the mirror. We use survey-based data as well as media data, and we help them to put a score on their reputation and then do something about it. It's fascinating work. So it has been important always. In about 2018, when the Me Too movement was kicking off and there was a lot going on around climate activism, we could see the wave rising in terms of CEO level visibility into reputation and wanting metrics around it. And like you said just now, it's even hotter, and reputation is now talked about across the whole C-suite. So it's a really exciting time for us.
Yeah, now that's a really interesting concept, measuring the value of reputation, especially in a way that CEOs and the CFOs can understand. And that's been a challenge for PR for decades, hasn't it? That we can't necessarily measure in the same way that perhaps advertisers could through Nielsen. Now, Nielsen's having its own problems with its measurement system, but at least the whole industry bought into that. So do you see, can you actually put a number on a company's reputation, a financial number or a value that they can apply to their balance sheet? And how does that work, and how does that go down with corporations?
It is a really interesting area. The whole measurement system and KPIs for the C-suite is evolving, but we do put a rating on both your reputation. There's a reputation score, which is a how much do you love me score. It's an emotional bond that stakeholders have with you. And so we put a score on reputation for each of our companies per stakeholder, because stakeholders behave differently. And understanding the complex system that you're operating in is one of the major jobs for CEOs and their teams. And so then there are 7 drivers of reputation, which help to unpack the rational behaviors behind that emotional bond. And so you get a score for each of those too. Now, your question is a big one, which is like, how do you put a financial number to that? We've done plenty of studies on how they track together, the reputation score that we provide to companies, and then things like enterprise value, revenue, churn, and all those. But what I generally say to clients, Steve, is that the world is big, and there's going to be a lot of fluctuations along the way. In the long run, good reputation companies will increase in enterprise value, but it's not a straight correlation that can be easily quantified. There's lots of ups and downs in the middle, which you would expect. Crises come, there's a lot of activity that has to do with your competitors, which will influence your enterprise value. And it's not always related to exactly what stakeholders think of you. So you have to look at non-financial metrics like your reputation score and financial metrics, and the tension has to be applied appropriately to both.
Yeah, I like the idea though. If we could really make that as an accepted sort of part of the CFO's sort of assessment and the financial industry's way of measuring balance sheets. You know, in the way that brands, you know, a company might have individual brands that have a value and an IP. So it would be great if we can get to that. What do you think? I mean, you've been working in this space a long time. You were at the World 50, where you were CEOs were you were kind of a trade group for CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the relationship is between CEOs now and chief communications officers? Because I sense from what we're seeing that CEOs really have a much greater appreciation of what their chief comms people do now.
It is tighter than ever. And I say that after actually working across all of the C-suite. You mentioned World 50. We worked with CEOs, CMOs, heads of supply chain. And when I actually joined the RepTrak company, I saw this incredible alignment opportunity. Because we work in a metrics space, I saw reputation as something that everyone would have a stake in across the C-suite. And in 2018, the CCOs still owned reputation. That has dispersed. What we've found now is that everybody's trying to take a slice of the pie. So our strategy at the RepTrak company is to be essential to the CCO, make them a hero by having the data that allows them to access the budgets that they need, get the seat at the table that they need, and influence business strategies as well as communication strategies. And so there is more visibility than ever, which we love. And you mentioned that it'd be cool to see CFOs and others more interested. We are seeing more and more companies put our RepTrak score in their KPIs. And in fact, there was one here in Australia a couple of weeks ago, a big grocery store that was straight in the financial press talking about how they had traded a sales metric in their dashboard for a reputation score. So the wave is rising. We're at the crest of it, and it's really exciting time.
What do you think, what would your advice be to CCOs in that new environment? They're almost like the liquid that runs between every department, or the glue that holds every department together. But that's a more responsible role. And, you know, with more responsibility, you've got to, there's more accountability, isn't there? So what advice are you giving CCOs in making this new dynamic work properly and effectively?
So first of all, the complex stakeholder system has to be understood really clearly, and that's a big job. And I know CCOs are good at that already, but increasingly we're getting a lot of questions around like, okay, how do I set targets for my influencers as well as the informed public, as well as my investors? And so understanding that complexity and the richness around that, and making sure that you're being the, let's say, the accountability partner for the CEO on what they're saying and doing is really important. We use media data and survey data, like I said, and often we'll speak to clients about, the good work that they're doing, and they're frustrated because they can't get credit for the community impact they're having, or something around citizenship that's important to their reputation. And when you look at their media strategy, so much of the news is about their financial performance, which is often the least important of the 7 drivers of reputation. And so we say to them, understand the stakeholder, understand the most important drivers for your company and for your industry, and then use that data to influence the CEO and your peers on what you need to do and say. So number 1 is understand the stakeholder system. Number 2 is understand what are the biggest drivers of your reputation in the context. And number 3 is close the gap between your ESG performance and your reputation performance, because no one gets a pass on ESG right now. As we know, COP26 is on, everyone's talking about it.
That's very true indeed, yeah. And you've got this ESG Perception product as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's we are so happy that financial markets have lit up their interest in ESG, because actually we consider that we've been in ESG since the beginning. One of our very first companies as a client was an oil company that was having trouble with activists, and they wanted to understand better their reputation so that they could work on it. They thought they were doing reasonably good things. They weren't getting credit for those things. And so we worked with them, and then we've expanded from there and work across every industry. So we've always been in responsible business. Now the financial markets are bringing the urgency and the heat, and the expectations have risen. That has flowed through to media. Everyone now is asking questions about that. And so what we're finding is companies are using self-reported data to say what they're doing around ESG, but don't really know how much credibility they have out in communities for the good things that they're doing. And so we bring that unique lens, which is the perception side and the media side, to offset and look at the gap between what they say they're doing and then what they're getting credit for. Our goal is for companies to get credit for the good work they're doing. And if they're not doing good work, to help them make a strategy. So that's really interesting because most others metrics out there are either self-reported or web scraped or ratings agency analyst provided.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there is a lot of skepticism out there, especially about the climate issue, isn't there? And you mentioned COP26. We've seen companies like ExxonMobil get dinged this week about people being skepticism about their claims about trying to move to a more sustainable future, but then still maybe doing lobbying around things that are trying to deny climate change. And there's different dynamics in every company. We don't have to go into specific ones, but there is that sort of juxtaposition between trying to create a new future and trying to really totally change and disrupt your business, but also changing that perception, but seem to be doing it authentically, because if it's not authentic, then you're going to get caught out in this modern environment, aren't you?
You certainly are. And many CEOs have been caught out in the last year, whether it was around the social justice claims that they made that then were found later to be not exactly lined up with the proof points in the background, or whether it's around climate and then the sort of power of the mobile phone in everyone's hands to call you out faster than ever is a real threat to companies. And so what we find with CEOs is particularly is that like they need to take longer to actually identify which topics, whether it's climate change, reducing waste, air pollution, or societal issues such as gun control, or back in the earlier part of the year around voting rights. Taking a long time to work out what you're going to be overt about and where you're going to put your stakes, and taking the stakes really seriously, I think is where we see people fall short. So, we were recently talking to a big banking client that took 2 years to really work out where the CEO was going to weigh in and how heavily they were going to weigh in. And the CCO is, like you said, the sort of the person who's in the middle of that and is the advisor on it. So it is a tricky environment. It's complex. Expectations are high, but metrics can help. And making sure that you place your bets very carefully with authenticity about what the CEO cares about is really important.
Just to finish up, looking forward, we're into this next stage of this hiatus, if you like, where the world is kind of opening up and we're seeing travel opening up and in-person stuff happening. We're seeing a new future of work, a new future of organizations. What is there one thing or a couple of things you see next year that are going to be top of mind for in corporate reputation? Employee engagement's got to be pretty high up the list, hasn't it?
It is high on the list, as it should be, in terms of what companies need to do to get people to work for them. But interestingly, Steve, actually workplace is one of the 7 drivers, does not rank in the top 3 for most industries. So that's fascinating. What does matter, though, is the way that you conduct yourself. And, the way you conduct yourself, conduct or governance is one of the 7 drivers of reputation. 2 is the one to really watch. And so conduct is about openness and transparency, and you can apply this in an ESG setting or in a workplace setting or in a way you interact and give back to the community setting. And so openness and transparency, being fair and being ethical in business is the place to play. I'm personally fascinated by watching what's going on in the auto industry right now, because I think it's a fascinating sort of case study on what's ahead past COVID. They're in the thick of supply chain issues. They're in the thick of the climate topic. Everybody's got labor problems. And seeing the auto companies fight through that is really interesting, as well as the retailers. We're coming up to holidays and there's no consumer that's not worried about whether the supply chains are going to hold up for their immediate needs. And so the way I think about looking forward is what industries can we really learn from that are in the crosshairs of this very complicated environment we're operating in? And then how can we translate those into our company? And so companies like auto and retail will be fascinating to watch. Conduct and governance is like the place where I say we really need to put a lot of our reputation work to play.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And with the electronic vehicle thing, you make a fair point. The supply chain, absolutely massive issues. There's going to be plenty on all of our plates next year. So thanks for sharing some of those trends, Kylie. Good to chat to you. And look forward to tracking the reputation indexes that you produce over the next 12 months.
Thanks, Steve. It was a pleasure. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.